It's Wednesday, October the 23rd, 2019, and I am Devin Miller. This is the Cage Rage Podcast. Riding along with me, as always, is Miguel Iterati, and we have a lot to cover today. We're getting a little bit of a late start in the week of recapping this past weekend, but last Friday, before we go any further, we do need to start off by recapping what went down last weekend in Boston. And we had Chris Weidman take on Dominic Reyes in the main event. And if we needed a new contender at light heavyweight, Miguel, I think we got one. Dominic Reyes goes in and blasts out Chris Weidman in the first round with his most impressive performance to date so far. Gets him out in a little over a minute. Chris Weidman is now 1-5 in his last 6 bouts. Dominic Reyes remains undefeated, 6-0 in the UFC now, and looks like a formidable challenge for Jon Jones moving forward. A new, young, undefeated contender, something that Jon Jones has not had staring at him for a very long time. What's your initial thoughts, Miguel? We covered this. We're going to cover all 6 of the fights that we covered from last week. We talked about this was a card that had a lot of old vets coming in that were trying to reinvent themselves, and we had a lot of new talent that were coming in that could potentially make a big name. I don't think any star potentially shined brighter than this on this night than Dominic Reyes, who really went in there and put a stamp and said, I am a contender. I am a legit top 5 light heavyweight in the world right now. Give me Jones. What do you think?
Well, I think we laid it out beforehand, right? That either guy wins this fight, they really need to do it in impressive fashion to get into the Jon Jones conversation at the very least, right? So it was Reyes that achieved that, and I went the other way. So I apologize to Chris Weidman myself for maybe jinxing him or whatever, because I've been on a streak of not picking the right guy. I thought Weidman had a chance because without having to do the weight cut, he's still a little bit of a fresh body in there. He doesn't have a lot of mileage, but he does have a lot of experience, the Silva fights and that sort of stuff. And, I thought Reyes was the guy with 11 fights that still had, a few questions to answer on his resume. So I did pick Weidman. So I got to eat some crow for that. Does that make Reyes an instant contender? With getting him out so fast and stuff, that was the path that we thought he needed to take. I still think, the fact is if Jones extends this into a longer fight because he wants to make it longer and carries it into the 3rd, 4th round and stuff, Reyes is going to be somewhere he's never been before, and that's comfortable waters for Jones. This could have been a better fight for Reyes in terms of banking experience and things in preparation for Jones, but with the explosive, outcome of it and getting him out in the first round, he gets himself in the conversation. I still don't think he has enough experience for Jon Jones. I'd like to see, him have another couple of fights, Johnny Walker have another couple of fights, and then if him and Walker met, that's a contender for Jones. That's the way it should be, but we're in a hyper-accelerated era where, 2 or 3 fights in, and then all of a sudden you're a championship contender. Reyes is looking that way, but to throw him in next, that's not optimal.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with there's just really, as we talked about last week, unless a curveball comes in and it's Rumble Johnson or Jon Jones moving up to heavyweight or some kind of massive super fight being really rushed, like with something like Israel Adesanya, there's really nobody else left right now because the Dom Reyes fight makes a lot more sense than rehashing a Anthony Smith fight at this point. I do think that Dom Reyes looked a lot better. And I think that those fights with Ovince St. Preux and Volkan Oezdemir that he went 3 rounds in, arguably lost the Oezdemir fight, really gave him a lot of in-cage experience. I think he's went back and sharpened up what he's really good at. We do need to talk a little bit about, because we talked about it a bit with Luke Rockhold. He tried to go up and reinvent himself at 205. That failed miserably, got his jaw broke. First round knockout by Jan Blachowicz. And first or second round. And then this bout, we get Weidman move up. He gets laid out quick. As I mentioned, Weidman's 1-5 in his past 6 fights, and they've not been pretty. I mean, he got starched here, got knocked out by Jacare. He violently got knocked out by Yoel Romero. He took a lot of damage in the fight with Luke Rockhold when he lost the belt. Do you think that he should retire at this point? Because I don't see a path toward a belt anytime soon with him. He seems like he's one of those types that really rose to fame, rose to stardom really quick. Started believing that he's going to be a long reigning champion. He's fallen off that pedestal very fast, and he doesn't want to just give in that, those days were quick lived, and, it's back to, go get a real job, go get a different job, because it's just those days are behind him of being a world-class top tier fighter in the UFC. What's your thoughts on Chris Weidman moving forward from here?
Yeah, I think he should consider retirement. I think it's a situation where, the fact is they're not just losses, they're knockout losses. So there does come in the trauma and things like that, we're becoming more aware of, and should be a concern to a guy. It should be something that he says, I'd like to be able to tell my grandkids about, my UFC career, rather than have other people tell them, because I'm sitting there, not really doing that well with talking and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you think, I'm not going to get hit, or you're not going to do, take damage in fights and things, and you always want to have a positive thing. But I think Weidman, I think you've been wise in pointing out several examples over the last, couple of years of guys who it looks like their time has passed. The big one I remember that I also picked as having a chance at winning his fight, and it didn't work out that way at all, was Cain Velasquez.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not exactly the same situation, but it is. Injuries and things kept him out of the ring for a while. And the bottom line is since you're not seeing the in-ring deterioration, with Weidman you do, but since you still have hope, you're not giving him credit, and you think he could rise back up. But meanwhile, he's not getting things better, without a lot of ring time and stuff like that. You have a small, limited amount of time to work on things and actually, better and improve your career and things. And when things start going south, and now you're one of five and things like that, I would like to see more fighters make a wise decision. The problem is with finances and things like that. You just said it. Did you bank away enough to to retire? Probably not. Did you make enough to retire? Probably not. Are you able to do another? If you're an Ally Aquinta type that can go off and sell real estate and is able to do a real job with income and things like that, then more power to you. And Weidman, nothing tells me Weidman's not capable of that, except for if he keeps getting knocked out, you don't want that brain shaking up a little bit. So if he has a recourse, he should be looking elsewhere at this point. Really, the 5 knockouts is 5 knockouts. NFL quarterbacks, after a couple of concussions, things like that, are starting to really analyze these things. And, when you're at 5 knockouts, the way Weidman's been knocked out in some of them, all caution should be primary. And anything else, including the fighter saying he's fine and stuff like that, really needs to be taken with a grain of salt. I'd be very careful before putting him back in the ring. I understand Dana White has slated a potential conversation with him and things like that. And, hopefully Weidman, and his support group make the right decision.
I think what you mentioned is a lot of what I was thinking is, do some of these fighters have too much liability financially to walk away? And, they've spent most of their 20s and 30s pursuing this kind of a career, and then it dies out quick, and all of a sudden their payroll starts to drop. They start seeing the perspectives of making a lot less money than what they were. I don't know how many more fights that Weidman has left on his contract. I don't know what the UFC does in these kind of negotiations when they see a fighter. They want to protect his future. They want him out of there. They don't want to see him, committing himself to more fights, but they owe him 3 or 4 more fights. I don't know if they can buy him out of that contract or what they can do. All that stuff goes on behind the scenes, I'm sure. But I do wonder, did we get too big of a house? Did we get too much liability? Is there too much stuff we haven't paid for yet that we need to make this income? And, it makes it almost unaffordable for them to walk away. And as I said, I think there needs to be a lot of mentoring in this kind of a sport, in all professional sports, because it's temporal. It's 10, 20 years max, and it comes and it goes and it goes very quick. But moving on from here, Miguel, if there's one fight that should have happened a month earlier, because this fight would have definitely probably been different had it been a 5-round bout. Yair Rodriguez goes in and gets a 3-round decision victory over Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens really coming on hard in the 3rd round, dropped in the 2nd round, hurt very badly, fought through the pain, grinds through it, starts to wear down Yair Rodriguez. Yair Rodriguez really seeming to fade, not being able to stop the takedown. Jeremy Stephens only looking like he was getting stronger. This fight was scheduled a month ago to be a 5-round main event, and due to a 15-second eye poke, it was ran back this past weekend in Boston, and Yair gets the victory. Deservingly so. The first 2 rounds were definitely him. But my big takeaway from this is you look at these new contenders, you see such a stacked division at featherweight right now underneath Max Holloway. He's facing Volkanovski. You got guys like Zabit. You got Calvin Kattar. You got Yair Rodriguez. You got some of these new talent, Brian Ortega. My big takeaway from this was, as I said, if this was a 5-round fight, I would have favored Jeremy Stephens now for sure. And Yair Rodriguez just looks like, since his lone loss in the UFC to Frankie Edgar, he just looks like he's just gotten better at what he was already good at. And his weaknesses are still there because he was getting taken down pretty handily, and he did start to fade. So I think that's concerning for Yair, that he doesn't really seem to be getting better with his weaknesses. What do you think, Miguel?
I think we were robbed last week, and we gave the UFC and both fighters, and everybody deserves credit for redoing the fight fast and getting it, the issue resolved as efficiently as possible. We didn't have to wait long. The guys went in and did the fight, and it was a great fight, a solid fight. So, yeah, we were robbed. The 2 rounds make a huge difference. Jeremy Stephens definitely has an argument there that, the fight was probably heading in his direction. It becomes, a big what if, but, at the end of the day, we got the right guy winning this fight because he did win 2 rounds of it, Are the questions still there with Yair Rodriguez? Yeah, the questions are still there. And it has to do a lot with the fact, you're fighting a guy who's 500 in the UFC with 30-something UFC fights. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that, in the first round, Stephens isn't coming out on all cylinders sometimes. Sometimes you can't do that every single fight, every single time. And, guys like that, just there's time-space continuum in the octagon is just completely different. They've been there so much longer than everybody else, So you do wonder if Stephens had been confident like he was in the 3rd round all the way through, the fight might have gone a different way. But we'll never know, I'm just glad we got the fight and that it wasn't like an eye poke. And then the guys, they never got done, and it just becomes an asterisk on everybody else's career. So my hat's off to Yair Rodriguez. It would have been a hell of a fight to deliver to the Mexican audience, too, from what we saw. So the UFC really still, has some ground to cover and make up for that debacle in Mexico.
Yeah, I agree, and I wouldn't even mind if they ran this back again because I think that they could still sell this as a main event with how it finished. It was a great fight, and in Yair, as I mentioned, came out strong, was just tearing Stephens up early, really looked creative as always, very powerful, far faster, far more dynamic, but just fades and clearly does not have the wrestling, I believe, to keep up with a really top-notch wrestler that would be in that division. The thing is, when you look at that division, the top guys, you don't really see too many top wrestlers. So he does have that in his favor. But somebody with the pressure of like a Volkanovski, I don't think that he would have I'm not sure that he would have made it out of the 3 rounds. And we saw what Frankie Edgar did to him. Moving on to the third, to another fight from here. Can't have a Greg Hardy fight without some controversy, Miguel. Greg Hardy goes in there, gets a decision win, gets a win over Ben Sausley. It is overturned after the fact. due to some in-ring controversy where going into the third round, he asked the commission if he can use his inhaler, and they allow him to, and then he gets penalized and it gets overturned as a no contest. Dominic Cruz and Daniel Cormier were visibly shook by this, that he would even think that he can use an inhaler. But nevertheless, Hardy looked better than he's probably had yet in his career. He's definitely evolving. And if we need to ever have a reason to give him some respect, despite all the controversy, despite all the moral failings of this man's life, it was announced just after this that he will be stepping up at the beginning of next month to fill the place that fill in for Junior Dos Santos, who had to pull out of his fight with Alexander Volkov, and will be taking on Alexander Volkov, a top 10 ranked heavyweight, on about 18 days' notice. And as I mentioned, if we needed a reason to give Greg Hardy some respect, Miguel, he did look better. He is improving. And here he is. He's stepping in against a very, very tough guy who got a knockout win over Fabricio Verdum, was beating Derek Lewis until the infamous comeback knockout loss last year. This is a tough fight for him that he's going to be moving forward. What's your thoughts on what Greg Hardy showed us last Saturday? What's your thoughts about him moving in against a legitimate contender in Alexander Volkov? And just the prospect of what I mentioned last week. Is there a potential that we have a heavyweight contender emerge from Greg Hardy? I mean, he's only been training about a year and a half.
Let's see what Volkov does with Greg Hardy next week, or next month when they fight. The fact is Volkov is coming up on 40 fights. He's a former Bellator champion. He had a nice UFC run there before the Derek Lewis loss. And he's 30 years old. He's tall, and he's a fighter first, right? Not a football player switching over. I firmly believe that this is the type of matchup that is a challenge to Hardy, because a guy who may not be a top-notch guy, just based on experience, should be able to handle most 5-1 guys, even if they're stronger than him or faster than him and things like that, which, Hardy we know is an athlete and stuff. So, yeah, this is a tall order for Greg Hardy, and it is something that you normally would give respect to a fighter for. I'll give Hardy a certain amount of begrudging respect for stepping up, 18 days notice and things like that. But the truth is, he's sort of in a box. He sort of has to do something like this to get rid of some of the negative, rhetoric that comes around him. From the fact is, every one of his fights has had one little controversy or another, and some of his own doing. No better example than this last fight with an inhaler. The thing is I promoted, I don't know, somewhere about 100 MMA shows, and I've had to deal with guys with inhaler stuff, and it's preliminary fight shit. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing where it's like once they get to a certain level in the UFC, like Volkov, you're not going to have Volkov sitting there like, can I use an inhaler? Because he knows already. And just those holes in Hardy's game just he's got to prove something. And maybe stepping up and doing a fight with a guy, like Volkov, if he's able to win it, and even in stylish fashion, basically, just if he's able to win it, that will help me, say that's a legitimate win. Whereas, I don't know who Ben Sassoli is. With all due respect, I follow the sport pretty good, I'm not that familiar with Ben Sassoli, you know what I mean? It's like, now Volkov, there's a gap there with what Hardy's doing and has been doing here. So, yeah, I want to see it. But respect, all of a sudden, I'm going to forget all the baggage he carries? Not quite. Even if he wins, not quite. It's just now he's found a path. Keep doing that, and we'll forget about the other stuff. But there's just too much around this guy. And like I said, I don't see, I can't believe that they're like Dallas Cowboy fans at home, worrying about Sunday's game and then also being like, oh, Greg Hardy's fighting Saturday. Let's watch that. I don't think he's crossing over that many fans and stuff like that. I firmly believe he should have been one of the first 3 fights on this card.
Well, yeah, we're going to get to this. We're going to have a little bit of conversation here briefly in just a moment about people getting more attention than they deserve because we have another big Victor from last Saturday that's bringing attention to that when it comes to a different competitor. But Greg Hardy, I will say this, he did look better. He's getting a little bit more lighter on his feet. He's starting to pick his shots, was showing that he's improving his kicks. He does still have an energy issue. He definitely does have a cardio issue, which I think that has to do with him training for years for quick bursts of energy with prolonged rest right afterwards. MMA is more of a anaerobic long form of a discipline where you got to have quick bursts of energy followed by steady bursts of energy. Quick bursts of energy followed by consistent energy. Football is about just high performance, high intensity, and he's got a lot of muscle memory and a lot of cardio that's committed to that type of style of athletics. And, it's going to be hard for him to translate that over, I think, into MMA. But I'm sure that he'll get there. But, it's always a controversy with Greg Hardy, and we're going to definitely see a big step up in competition for him going forward. But we saw Dominic Reyes become a star Friday. We were talking about that. Yair Rodriguez kind of stays where he's at. Greg Hardy, I think, is kind of getting a little bit more attention, getting a little bit more respect as a fighter, but still has a lot of controversy. We had another guy who had a potential of making a name off of an old vet this past weekend, Jonathan Pierce, and it didn't turn out good for him. He gets finished in the first round, completely dominated. Joe Lozon comes out of nowhere, coming off of a bad losing streak. A lot of people were thinking this was his swan song. Still might be. I don't think he could probably ask for a better way to go out if he does decide to hang it up. But with as good as he looks, I doubt that that's going to be the case. But he goes in there. He looked like a vet against a little boy against Jonathan Pierce. Runs him over, gets him out of there before Jonathan Pierce can even get going in this fight. I'm one of those types that doesn't mind if somebody walks away on top. That doesn't mind if somebody, even if they looked really good, gets a really good win and decides, that's a good moment to go out on. What's your thoughts here on Joe Lozon? Where does he go from here? But do you think that this is a perfect way to come back, get a win off a long losing streak, wave goodbye and walk away with your integrity? Or do you think he should just keep fighting until he goes on another losing streak and then, walk away in shame? What's your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I think I'd like to see more fighters, especially like Loazo. You know what I mean? It's like Joe hasn't really been in the title picture for,
exactly
a decade, right? Really. So it's a situation where he's an attraction because of his name, his style is appealing, and things like that. So I can see why the UFC kept him around and kept him there for a long time, and why they might consider keeping him now. You know what I mean? Because of all those little factors. But now this is where it comes down to the fighter and his support group. His career, is he a Hall of Famer? I don't know what kind of credentials you want your Hall of Famers to have, but he's a guy with so many fights and so many good moments that, maybe at least we should have the conversation about him, right? But guys like that who are not surefire Hall of Famers, who didn't have long runs with the belt and things like that, and they're trying to recapture that glory. I think guys like that, like Loazo, should say, look, that was a win. That was a good win. I've been going on a loss. That's the right way to go out. Let me go out that way. There's no shame in that. You can come back and say, I won. Now I'm going to go on a streak and stuff like that. But again, how realistic is that? When we've seen the pattern, we've seen them already some of these things go down. You know what I mean? It's like Lawson is not ready for, Khabib. You know what I mean? So what are we keeping him around for? Entertainment value. He's still valuable. He showed it this last week. So it comes down to the fighter hopefully saying, that's a good way to go out. That's a good last chapter for my story, and I'll take it. I'd like to see him take that option because Lawson's a guy that's hard not to like.
I agree with that, and you saying that he's not ready for Khabib, I would argue that he's probably not ready for even to try to walk up toward something like that. Like and I don't want to see that with some of these guys. Like, when it gets to a point, as you mentioned, where you've been out of contention for so long, and you know you're destined to have an up and down reign moving forward, take the win. Be happy that you went out on a good note and move on from there. But as I said on our preview, we talked a lot about this was a card that was full of potential names that could become standouts given their performance on this card. Dominic Reyes, I felt like really stood out more than anybody. Yair, looked great, but didn't really, I don't think, improve his stock anymore. He didn't lose anything on it, but he didn't really improve it anymore. When you look at Jonathan Pierce, he didn't even get off the ground. And, when we cover Greg Hardy, he's still full of controversy. He's still green, but, he's got more of his opportunity coming up. And you had some vets that, stood out and looked good with Jeremy Stevens and with Joe Lozon. But we did have another standout of a young contender who came in and, continues to show that she's 21 years old and she's a powerhouse. And that was Macy Barber going in and getting another stoppage win, stopping Jillian Robertson in 3 minutes and 4 seconds of round one. And she's finally getting the attention I figured that she would have. A little quicker than I would like because I'm getting a little nervous that the UFC's really getting behind her. And she's got she's definitely arrogant. She's definitely got a hot persona. She's calling out names. She's got the UFC president that's really, mentioning her. She's been all over talk shows. She had a sit-down interview with Ariel Helwani this weekend. She looks good. She's very talented. This is nothing new. This fight went about how I figured it would go, but I'm a little bit afraid that they're going to push her a little faster than what they should. But I do like that she comes right out, calls out Paige Van Sant with the justification that people like Van Sant should not be getting the attention that they get, that she's just a pretty girl, and there's other talented fighters that deserve a lot more attention than what she gets. Paige Van Sant apparently came out today, basically listed a long list of fighters that she will fight, except Macy Barber, and that's exactly the headline here from ESPN's Brett Okamoto. Paige Van Sant will fight anyone except Macy Barber. And you go in and you look at her justification in the article. She says the lesson of the day is respect, and she respects people who have dedicated themselves and all this, and they're not interested in fighting Macy. And apparently it's just because they view her as being disrespectful and all this. But I think that is what she continues to impress me, that she's not pushing herself further. She's not calling for a title shot. She's calling for a familiar name to get her name even bigger. She just fought down in rank. She didn't fight up in rank. I feel like Macy Barber probably knows better than the promotion that she still wants some time to develop. What do you think, Miguel? Because her calling back out Paige Van Sant, that's another going backwards. But yet it's a name that people would recognize, and it would be a name that could get her a lot of publicity. She's trying to cause some controversy. She's trying to really put the pressure on Paige Van Sant. Paige Van Sant looks like a total fool coming out today and even saying she should have just kept quiet. She comes out, she lists a list of people she'll fight. She listed every woman on the roster at 115 and 125 pounds except Macy Barber. Makes this quote about respect and all this, basically saying Macy's disrespectful, I'm not going to fight her. Well, tell that to a professional fighting audience crowd. They're going to look at that like, oh, you don't want to fight that girl. She's calling you out. You guys are ranked decently in the rankings together. That's a good fight. People are going to want to see it. So Macy's trying to get that fight out there. I think that's smart. I'm just a little nervous that when she's getting this kind of attention, getting these kind of wins with the UFC, and I saw it on a lot of forums, the UFC, that people are wanting to start seeing her, move up those rankings. And I'm just afraid 2 or 3 more of this, they're going to end up throwing her in there with Shevchenko at 21, 22 years old, and I think that'd be a mistake.
Let me ask you a question. What is the right number of fights for a person to be going into their first title shot?
Well, it depends on where they're at, I think, because Adesanya was somebody that had almost 100 combat sport fights before.
There are guys that break the mold, but in general.
In general, I think it depends on the quality of the competition, how long they've been around. We haven't even seen Macy Barber face some any adversity yet. I mean, she needs to get in there with, some Joanne Calderwoods or even some Roxanne Modaffari's. I mean, she needs to get in there with some people that have years and years of experience that are not just going to get cracked and fold. She needs to get in there with some people that, are going to be able to, deal with some of her power. I will say this. She's a powerhouse for a 125-pound fighter. I mean, she is definitely a superstar in the making, and people forget she just turned 21 years old. And I think that's where a lot of this hype's coming from. But go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah, no, I feel the tendency has been in recent years for the UFC to rush title shots.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm worried about the same things you're worried about here with Macy Barber. I don't think there's any reason why somebody shouldn't say to her, look, I'd like to see you fight for the belt at 25. And what we're going to do for you for the next couple of years while we build you up and get your experience that way, and you got to keep winning, but we're going to get you 4 fights for 2 years and 3 fights a year for the next couple of years so that you book, that's 14 fights in 4 years. And then we'll label you into the title picture and stuff. But they don't have quite enough time. They're not there yet. So you get guys like, many guys get derailed before, before the title shot, because they're trying to bring them along, and maybe it's like they give them one fight. There are a lot of guys that were undefeated or girls, that were undefeated or had, sterling records moving up. And then, when they had to jump in competition, they didn't even get to the title picture. Sergio Pettis comes to mind. Miles Jury comes to mind. And then you got guys that they threw into the title picture. Maybe guys like Cody Garbrandt that even won the belt. But did they have the pedigree to hold on to it? And I think that's what worries me about having guys. And you're right, a guy like Adesanya may be a special case. But that's what worries me about just labeling a guy like Dominic Reyes as a title competitor or title contender with 12 fights. And Macy Barber does appear to be in danger of going down that road.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a fighter nowadays in the modern era, you kind of want that, right? You want that label. You want the fight. The title fight means the payday. The way things are going around now, if you're not in the super upper tier of the UFC, I don't think your paydays are, retirement type of paydays where it's like, I can go ahead and, the rest of my life is taken care of. I think people are still putting in, a lot of hard work and stuff like that at the lower level. So yeah, when the jump comes, they're like, well, we're going to pay you 3 times the amount. What's the name of the big heavyweight with the ball wash stuff that got the shot with Daniel Cormier? Derek Lewis. It might be Derek Lewis. I don't want to get the guy wrong.
Yeah, Derek Lewis.
There was a guy. How can you say no, right? How do you say no? But he probably should have. If you're in a situation where it's like, yeah, I'd rather wait. Will you give me the shot with a 3-month training camp and stuff like that? The UFC says, no, you won't get that shot. So sure, you got to take it. That means things aren't quite perfect for the fighters. I'd like to see Macy Barber at the peak of her powers entering a title shot and not face Shevchenko when Shevchenko's at the peak of her powers and she's still not developed, and there's still a lot of questions with her, including level of competition, because right now the names on her resume, she could use a couple of names that jump out more at you. That would be step one. But give her one name against Paige Van Zandt and then rush her into a title shot. I'm as worried as you are that they're going to do dumb shit like that.
Yeah, I would still think you would have a hard time though naming a name in all of women's MMA right now that's more of a hotter prospect, not contender, prospect than Macy Barber right now. I think she's probably the top prospect in women's MMA at this point, especially for her age and what we're seeing out of her. And I think a lot of people rush people when they see a 21-year-old who's doing this and she's in the rankings, she's dominating everybody they're putting in front of her, because it was the same stuff like back with the John Jones days. People love to find something that's exceptional. They love to follow something that they see that could be exceptional. I'm not going to put Macy Barber in that category yet, as you mentioned. She needs to face some contenders, but I'll tell you this: she wrecks 2 or 3 more girls in the same fashion that she has in her first 3 UFC fights, and she ends up beating or even just contending with a Valentina Shevchenko at 22, 23 years old. At that point, you'll have a hard time not putting her in the exceptional category. But a lot is left to be seen with that. She's still very young. She still has a long way to go, a lot of development to go. She has a lot of talent to step up against. But nevertheless, her star power and her stock definitely moved up this past week. And we won't spend too much time on this last one. But one guy who did not really move forward in his in his star power and in his prospect potential was Deron Wynn. Goes in there, looks like a amateur version of Daniel Cormier. Really good wrestling, but looks like he has a long way to go. Darren Stewart, on the other hand, picks up a really good win, looked really good. This was a decent fight. I had Stewart win in the last 2 rounds. Deron Wynn seemed very one-dimensional. Not a good look for Deron Wynn, but then you remember that he only had 6 fights coming into this bout, so maybe he's getting a little bit too much hype too fast. But Deron Wynn goes in, doesn't get the W. Definitely looks like he has a long way to go with his development. What do you think?
I still think that wrestling is the sport that prepares guys best to cross over to UFC.
I agree.
Jiu-jitsu, is right up there with it, but because of the gi and some of the nuances and stuff, I still prefer wrestling as a base, right? So that's why you get high off a guy like Wynn when he says he's going to come over and stuff like that. But we're right back into the same conversation we were just having. Is you're talking about a guy with 6 fights. What is wrong with bringing these guys? We talk things like development. The UFC likes to talk development. One more fight and you're in a title shot. Where's the real development in that? I don't see development. I see their agendas and their, bottom line meat, trying to make a star and meet, get the interest and, make money and stuff like that. But true fighter development, I don't see that there. And I think that the fact is when you had a Mark Coleman come over, and Coleman was a 92 Olympian, and if you remember, if I remember the 92 Olympic team, you had Townsend Saunders, you had Kevin Jackson, and Mark Coleman, and I'm pretty sure there was at least one other guy from that team that dabbled in MMA, that did MMA. The only one that really succeeded was Coleman. It's arguable that of those guys, Coleman was easily the worst wrestler. Kevin Jackson, Townsend Saunders was a silver medalist, So, and I'd have to look it up and see who the 4th guy was, but I'm pretty sure Coleman was a worse wrestler. But the fact is when you look at it, Mark, personality-wise, was a type A, and a guy that didn't shy away from hey, the wrestlers are fighting the football team kind of thing, that type of stuff. Mark was one of those guys that signed him up for a little extracurricular activities and stuff like that, as well. So you got to take that into account, that there is that mindset, that preparation, and that sort of stuff that I think not every single wrestler can just cross over, that old feeling of like, oh, I've never been punched in the face before. It's like, Mark had been punched in the face. He didn't worry too much about that. But you can see when a guy gets hit and they say, "Oh, I never felt that before." Wynn is a guy who should have been on the undercard. That's how you develop fighters. You don't put them in a huge spotlight area, even because now what you've done here is, you're taking a guy with potential, and rather than maybe take a baby step back and then let the guy, his potential isn't gone. He's still a wrestler of pedigree that could make a huge noise in this. The damage done to him by putting him so far up on the card and hyping him and stuff like that after only 6 fights is that you don't take a baby step back and then you bring him along. You took a huge step back in terms of reputation, how you present this guy next. So, yeah, I think they're a mess with what they call development because they don't develop fighters. And I feel bad for Win because Win is a guy that has potential and maybe he's not going to get a chance now to fill it. You know, the right way to do it is bring him back fast, take him back, and I never want to see him again off an undercard until he's got 15 fights on his resume.
I agree with you. And I also think he needs to get his weight in order because he's a small middleweight. I mean, in terms of just height and stature, I mean, he's got the Daniel Cormier effect of being a short, compact guy, but he definitely has a long way to go. And this was a fight, when you look at Darren Stewart as a striker, he could have potentially gotten hurt in this fight and about did a couple times, but he hung in there and took it to a decision, but definitely clearly lost this bout. And it'll be back to the drawing board for him. But he's got a good team. He's got good mentors around him. I have no doubt that he'll come back better. And hopefully, I agree with you. Hopefully, they take him a little bit slower moving forward.
Yeah, just to mention, I'm sorry, I did look up the Olympic team from 1992. You had Townsend Saunders, Kevin Jackson, and Kenny Monday. Those are the guys that crossed over to do MMA, which means Coleman is easily the least technical wrestler in that group. No knock on Coleman because he's an Olympian as well. But those guys, I mean, Jackson was a gold medalist. Saunders a silver medalist. These guys were the elite of the elite. But when they tried the wrestling, you know, the MMA, sure, their physicality and their mindset for competition and stuff, they can hang. They can even sit in and take 15 minutes of a beating in many cases, right? If they get a guy who's more advanced and stuff. But it's the mindset. It's like, okay, I'm in deep water now. What do I do? What do I do? Coleman had no questions. Coleman was operating on instinct. And all that makes a difference. Just being a great wrestler doesn't make you a great MMA fighter. And, you know, we'll see when hopefully he gets a chance to fulfill his potential.
I agree. And with that, we're going to move on to, we got to cover a little bit about what's going on this weekend. The UFC is going to be returning to Singapore. And it's going to be headlined by a pretty pivotal welterweight bout that you've been calling for all year since Ben Askren made his move to the UFC. It'll be Ben Askren taking on Damian Maia. You got the UFC's arguably the UFC's best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner in history against one of its best wrestlers in history. Two specialists going at it with a clashing grappling style. Very interesting fight. This is a very thin card, especially compared to last week. So we're not going to spend too much time covering all the ins and outs throughout the card. I got one other fight I do want to talk about. I do want to talk a little bit about Michael Johnson, but we're going to start real briefly, and we're going to cover. We're going to spend more time on Maia and Askren than any of the rest of the card for sure. But here you got Damian Maia nearing the end of his career. He's in his early 40s. You got Ben Askren coming off his lone loss of his career, the violent 5-second knockout to Jorge Masvidal from earlier this year. Askren was on the cusp of a potential title fight. Maia has become kind of a gatekeeper, but this is a perfect style fight for Damian Maia to maybe get a big win before he signs off in his career. He's on a 2-fight winning streak at this point. I don't know who to call in this fight because Ben Askren's a better wrestler, has really good jiu-jitsu himself, but he has virtually no striking. I think Damian Maia is a better striker than he is. Damian Maia has fought at 185 pounds before, and I'm not sure anybody wants to take Damian Maia to the ground. I guess I'll just throw it out there. I think I'm going to call Damian Maia to win this fight. What do you think, especially in 5 rounds? What do you think, Miguel?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards Maia myself because I feel like Askren, you know, what we're talking about here is two specialists, right? I think we've used that word a lot when we've talked about this as a potential matchup and stuff like that. Askren's wrestling is, you know, adapting to MMA, but that kind of means that you start like losing your real like fine edge for real wrestling. You know what I mean? It's not quite the same thing. So he's adapted it real well. And I think he's a freaky wrestler in that, you know, the first time he gets a hold of you, you're probably, even if you're a wrestler your whole life, he's a special guy, right? And there are many wrestlers like this, right? But, like, you know, he's one of those guys that when he grabs a hold of you, that first time you haven't felt something like that. You know, I could go back in MMA history, and Dennis Hallman was a wrestler that was a lot like that, in that, you know, he armbarred Matt Hughes twice. What more do you need to do that? He did it once, and then he did it again. And that's because they've got a couple of things that you just are unorthodox and you just can't deal with. Maia, I think, is more of a complete MMA guy that took his jiu-jitsu base and became an MMA guy. And yeah, I think it would be interesting if Maia, tied him up in the plum and finished him up with knees, And we'll see on the ground. Could he neutralize Maia? Yeah, I think the thing is as high a level of a jiu-jitsu practitioner as he is, no gi makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And Askren has been around enough to have felt. I've 10 years ago I heard about him sparring with Jake Shields and some of those guys and stuff out there. It's not like Maia's jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu's jiu-jitsu. Maia is a top elite guy. I don't think he's gonna have too much that Askren hasn't at some point come across.
I agree with that. I agree with that, Miguel. But the one thing that sticks out in my mind so much that I think parallels this fight is, remember that Damian Maia submitted Chael Sonnen years ago at middleweight. And Chael Sonnen, I believe, is a bigger, more complete, better version of Ben Askren, who has fought a lot of top competitors, and Damian Maia submitted him.
I think that's a good comparison. You're absolutely right. I think that's a great comparison. I'm not sure that Chael's the better wrestler there. I think Chael had a lot more experience in MMA and stuff, and that held back, hid some of his holes and stuff. But I think overall, I take Askren's competitive nature a little bit better. A guy who can stay undefeated as opposed to a guy who lets losses, wash off him and live to fight another day kind of thing. I think I like Askren's mentality of he didn't want to lose. Chael was okay with that, but I think it's an excellent comparison. I think you're right, and I think that gives Maia. We'll see. What do the sport books have? Let me look up the odds for you while I hand it back to you. But I was going to pick Maia as well. So
I definitely think I'm going to pick Maia in this fight, and although I do agree with you that I think Askren is a born winner. I think that he's somebody that's been very careful about how he manages his career. But, man, since he's been in the UFC right now, he hasn't landed a single significant strike. He goes in, he gets mollywopped real quick by Robbie Lawler before grinding that out with a controversial win, and then doesn't even get to fight against Jorge Masvidal, gets taken out in 5 seconds. And now he's thrown in against a guy who literally neutralizes his style so badly. I mean, it's really hard to look at what's happened with Askren so far and not think that some of the clashes he had with Dana White over the years has not come back to haunt him a little bit, because he's had a hell of a year in the 3 fights that he's had. He's took a lot of damage. He's been completely embarrassed. And now on his comeback, he has to go try to grapple with with Damian Maia.
He's entering to fight a favorite. He's at minus 190. Maia's at plus 165.
That's tempting to go slap $100 on Damian Maia. I'll say that. But I do want to talk about this co-main event, just because not because I care too much about Stevie Ray, who Michael Johnson's fight. Like I said, this is a very thin card. It's a forward card, and they just had a great fight night card last week. But I want to talk a little bit about Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson, to me, it surprises people. I really do believe, Miguel, that he's the most inconsistent fighter I've ever seen. People forget that this man has a knockout win over Dustin Poirier. He's the only man to ever pick up a win over Tony Ferguson in the Octagon years ago by decision. He has a win over Edson Barbosa. He has a win over Joe Lozon and Gleason Tebow. He was killing Justin Gaethje in Justin Gaethje's debut before he ended up getting knocked out. He's probably the only man who ever hurt Khabib Nurmagomedov in their fight, cracked him with a left hand. But yet he has just a plethora of losses on his record. And he's went down to 45. He just got starched by Emmett in a fight that he was winning. Michael Johnson, he got beat by Darren Elkins, who's a good fighter, but, he got completely lit up for 3 rounds against Nate Diaz. He's just been a really inconsistent guy who has a lot of talent, blistering fast hands. But here he is. He's fighting Stevie Ray. They're still giving him co-main event spots. He was an Ultimate Fighter standout. I really think it was just because I think the promotion really likes him. I mean, they've seen he has a lot of great potential, but he's just been so damn inconsistent over the years, and he's never really been able to get it together. And now he's taking a lot of hard losses, a lot of damage, a lot of he's had some knockouts. He took some bad damage when he fought Justin Gaethje. He really got knocked out bad in that last fight with Josh Emmett. But here he is. This is a fight he should win. I think keep in mind, this man, like I said, he starched in one round Dustin Poirier. He beat Tony Ferguson and Edson Barboza. That was at 55. He's at 45. This is a guy who should be a contender, but has never been able to string it together. He's just not one of those guys who keeps himself in the win column.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You said the UFC likes him, and I would say the problem with him is maybe that the UFC doesn't love him. You know what I mean? Because they've given him some spots and they've put him in there and they've kept him around even after losing streaks and stuff like that. But I think they've let him. They haven't guided him. They haven't shown him the huge love, the huge paydays. He's had a tendency to take and do the hard fights and stuff like that. He's got a good resume, as you pointed out, and he's always stepped up and stuff like that. But I think he became a guy on the roster that isn't one of the guys that's the first guy they think of, one of the top guys that they're looking to get a spot for. I think, after a while, you carry that baggage around and you wind up being like Michael Johnson, where you're bouncing back and forth, You go into some fights motivated, on some fights not motivated, and you get up and down performances. You're right. I know Darren Elkins personally, and I love Darren Elkins. But I think Michael Johnson, with his experience in an upper weight class and stuff like that,
should have won.
It's probably a fight that that is one of Elkins' better wins on his career.
For sure.
You know what I mean? So the bottom line is that's a fight that what Michael Johnson showed up. Why does that type of anomaly happen in this guy's career? Why
over and over again?
Yeah, why is and maybe that's being a tweener with the UFC where they like you, don't love you. He watched the Ronda Rousey stuff, the Conor McGregor stuff, and you got to think, hey, where's my love at some point? So I think that has a lot of effect on guys. There's not enough room at the top for some of these guys, and then in his case, in this particular fight, Stevie Ray, I think, is a guy that, he's 1-3 in his last 3 fights. It's a situation where none of the guys he's fought in there are, on Michael Johnson's caliber. I mean, Leonardo Santos is a good veteran and dangerous with his jiu-jitsu and stuff. I know him, well also from his Abu Dhabi days. But Johnson's the best fighter that Ray has fought in his last 4 fights, and Ray's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. So that's a tall order for Stevie Ray, I think.
I agree, and hopefully this is a good performance for Michael Johnson because he was making a little run at featherweight. He was winning the fight with Josh Emmett. He looked really good, but then got cracked. And if that one fight, if it wasn't for that knockout, he'd be a ranked featherweight right now with a lot of experience behind him at a division lower than where he had most of his experience. But also this weekend, which I think I might be just as equally excited for, we've got the finale of the Bellator welterweight Grand Prix and a big rematch between Rory MacDonald taking on Douglas Lima in the finale of this Bellator welterweight Grand Prix that I thought turned out to be a great success. A lot more than their heavyweight Grand Prix turned out to be. I think the featherweight one they have going on right now is the best they've done so far. But I think this is the best. I think in my personal, I'm excited for Maia and Askren. I know you're very excited for it. This is the fight I'm most looking forward to this weekend, just because, dude, Douglas Lima has just he's had some hiccups. He lost to Ben Askren. He lost to Rory MacDonald. He just keeps getting better. I think he becomes the Bellator champion this weekend. I think he's a top 10, maybe top 5 welterweight in the world in what I believe is the best welterweight division. Welterweight, I think welterweight's the best division in the sport right now. So that's saying a lot to say that he might be a top 5 welterweight in the world right now. He may be Bellator's top 2 or 3 best fighter. Rory McDonald's not done, though, but I just keep looking back at that John Fitch fight from earlier in this where, it's a different style fight. Lima's going to be more of a striker, but, there was we talked on here about where he's at, but also on this card, we don't really have to talk too much about it, but you got Paul Daly taking on Saeed Awad, and you also got Nick Newell returning, the notorious congenital amputee. Very inspiring fighter. He's on the main card of this Bellator 232 card. But really, this is a one-horse show when it really comes down to significance and worthy of some deep conversation. And that's the Bellator Welterweight Grand Prix final for the Bellator Welterweight Championship main event of UFC Bellator 232. The rematch between Rory MacDonald and Douglas Lima. One of the best offerings I believe Bellator's put on this year and that they can put on. So what's your thoughts on this? Because this has been a fight we've known was going to happen for a while. They were favored to make the finale at the beginning of this Grand Prix, and here we are. And I think it's going to deliver.
Yeah, you got Lima entering a minus 150 favorite. You got McDonald paying back at plus 130. So a nice tight fight, indicative of, what you pointed out, that it's a hard fight to pick and it's a compelling fight. And you're right. It's probably, Maia and Askren are both welterweights, but I think you're right that, or if somebody claimed that Lima and MacDonald were the two best welterweights in action this weekend, I think you could make a solid argument for that.
I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that.
So I definitely agree with you that this is definitely a fight that you want to watch. I think Lima is an underrated guy. MacDonald's one of those guys where, man, after he was questioning himself with, when he came over to Bellator and whether he should continue and stuff like that, I think that left a lot of questions and sort of knocked him down a couple of tiers. The thing about MacDonald, though, is that MacDonald's never really been a mental giant in my book. He's always been a physical freak.
Mm-hmm.
That you've been waiting for his mind to kind of, mature and catch up, And, maybe the fact is after he was like, questioning whether he should be in the sport, he came back and won a fight that a lot of people weren't picking him to win. So if he's put all that behind him, then yeah, we've got a hell of a fight, and he's still a stud. But MacDonald left open those questions, and that's why I think he comes into this one as an underdog.
I agree. And, I want to ask you real quick, though, how important, before we move on to our final headlines, our fight announcements, how important is it for Bellator that Douglas Lima becomes the Bellator welterweight champion this weekend? And what I mean by that is we see Robbie Lawler over in the UFC, and he's kind of becoming the preliminary gatekeeper. I mean, they had him matched up with Santiago Ponzinibbio after he's coming off of 2 losses, which I thought was just promotional malpractice and management malpractice on Lawler's team part to even do that to him. But they're trying to make names off him at this point. They know they don't look at him as a title contender anymore. He's been beat by RDA. He lost a controversial decision to Askren. Covington beat him. That era's over. That era, I think, was the era of Robbie Lawler as champion was defined by the Rory MacDonald bout. And the first one was really good, too. They fought twice, and Robbie won them both. Here you have Rory MacDonald, who, we know Robbie Lawler was never the same after the wars he went through as champion with Rory and with Condit and with Hendricks, getting knocked out by Tyron Woodley. I don't think Rory MacDonald's been the same person since those fights. But he's the champion over there in Bellator. He has not lost a fight in Bellator since he went over there. And he's another UFC reject. And I hate to call him that because he was a top 2 or 3 welterweight when he went over there. But he was a guy who lost to the champion twice. The champion that was the champion at that time is now not even ranked in the top 10 at welterweight. Then they got Douglas Lima, who, he lost to Koreshkov, but he beat Koreshkov twice. Yeah, he lost to Askren, but would he lose that fight now? He was a baby. He lost to Rory MacDonald the first time in a very close fight, but now he gets a chance to make it back. And he's never fought in the UFC. He's Bellator born and raised. So how important is it for Douglas Lima to go in there and become a winner? Because as you mentioned, this is a good weekend for Bellator. You just made a really good point. There's 2 Bellator and UFC, the two biggest promotions in the state, they're both headlined by a big welterweight bout, and you can argue that these two are the best welterweights fighting this weekend. How important would it be for Bellator to have a homegrown in-house talent become the champion this weekend impressively? And they have another champion now with Pitbull Ferrar, with Rafael Lovato, with Kyoji Horiguchi, some of these guys that are these are Bellator stars that are developing in-house. And they have a new champion that way. And they can go on to promote Douglas Lima as maybe top 5, top 2 or 3 best welterweights in the world.
How important is it for Bellator? Look, I think, for analysis, for the fighters and stuff, when you're trying to craft your legacy and stuff, I think you want to talk about that type of thing, that I'm a homegrown Bellator guy and I grew up here and blah, 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 and stuff like that. The fact is, I don't think Bellator as a promotion gives a shit about all that. And the reason about that is that on this card is also Jack Hager. Now, I got nothing against Jack Hager. I think potential-wise, I like when heavyweights come over, and he's a big, excellent athlete, 6'5", 260 and stuff like that. He's a former pro wrestler. But, again, this is the kind of thing where he should be on the undercard. They should be bringing him along, but they're going to give him a main card spot, and they're always going to have, something like a Jack Hager or something like, Fedor versus Quentin or something in the works where it sort of puts the guys that they're developing into a backseat, and they don't give them the respect themselves. So I think, these guys are putting in work that when me and you analyze it, they should get credit for. But I don't think that Bellator, Bellator doesn't even ride that in terms of their promotion and how they promote the event and stuff like that. They sit back and bring you, the Fedor commercials and things like that again. So, I think it starts with Bellator changing the way they deal with these guys. The thing is once you get a UFC belt, you automatically get bells and whistles, and you are a star. The Bellator guys, I don't think they feel that way. Especially when you're a champion and you're not even headlining their shows because they have a pro wrestler or a 45-year-old who's fighting on the main event.
I agree. I still, from a fan's perspective, which I think is the most important in a company's development, regardless how the company thinks about it or views it, I think that goes a long way. And I've said it forever. When Bellator has champions that the casual fan wants to see fight the UFC champions, they're going to have that's going to be big for their stock value over there. And that's what was happening when Nick Diaz and George St. Pierre were the champions of Strikeforce and UFC. And Gilbert Melendez and Benson Henderson were the champions. So maybe we'll get back to those days. But also, we need to talk about, before we sign off here, we got a pair of huge bantamweight bouts announced this week. Just today. Both lined up for UFC 245 in December. And I want to remind everybody that UFC 245 is headlined by a UFC welterweight title bout between Colby Covington and champion Kamaru Usman. The co-main event is featherweight champion Max Holloway taking on challenger Alexander Volkanovski. It's also got women's bantamweight bout title fight between Amanda Nunes and Jermaine Durandamy. It also has Robbie Lawler taking on Mike Perry. And now we have Jose Aldo, who I would have never guessed throughout his reign. I always expected I'd see him at lightweight. He's actually going to attempt to go down to 135 pounds. And they're going to throw him in there against the number one contender, which is, obvious. If he's going to do it, it's the same thing with Frankie Edgar was going to go down to 135 pounds. If they're going to do it, they got to fight the top of the division because they were stars at featherweight. Jose Aldo, a longtime featherweight champion. So he's going to go in there right against the former title challenger, Marlon Moraes. So, a win here, especially a dominant, impressive win, would probably get him Cejudo. But also announced was Urijah Faber, who we even debate about whether he should even come back. He comes back, gets an impressive win over a young Ricky Simone, gets himself in the rankings. But now they're just going to go ahead and just say, okay, you're 41 years old. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it. They're just going to throw him in there with Petr. I look at that I got a way different view. I'm very optimistic about Aldo versus Moraes. Aldo's still in his early 30s, believe it or not. If he can make the weight safely, I think that's a very interesting fight and a very interesting division to an already super exciting division. When I look at this, I see this as a chance to make a name off of Petr, and I feel like it's almost suicidal for Urijah Faber. But we'll go back and we'll start off with Aldo and Moraes. They're going to be fighting at UFC 245. Aldo going down to 35. Is this going to be another example of TJ Dillashaw trying to make 125? Or what's going to happen here? Because Jose Aldo says he's walking around at 150 pounds. Said he's never dieted a day in his life. Says he feels great. He's been intermittent fasting, all this kind of stuff. Says he's, taking a page out of St. Pierre's book. He's going to make 35. He's going to be a double champion. If he makes it and he's anything close to the Jose Aldo at featherweight, I have no doubt he'll be the champion by midsummer next year. But if he goes down there and his chin's even more deteriorated and has way less power in his punches, I don't know, especially against Marlon Moraes, if that's going to be that could be a quick one-round finish, just like Cejudo and Dillashaw. What's your thoughts on bantamweight Jose Aldo?
Well, I think Moraes is the right opponent because we get to find out right away. You know what I mean? It's like if he's not going to be serviceable, then he's not going to get by Moraes. If the weight cut is going to be hurting him and stuff, then he's probably not going to get by Moraes, et cetera, et cetera. Then we'll know. So we know right away if he's going to be a factor or not. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with him taking the challenge. I wonder what happened to Renan Barao, huh? But that's one of those things where the guys from many years ago, when you want to look at it, you really, really, really got to respect how fast your career can come off the rails, And the fact is Jose's went off the rails, and here he's trying to get it back to him. So I want to root for him, and I want to root for him to do well. And I would love to see him behead Henry Cejudo, quite honestly, because Cejudo is just not entertaining to me. I don't, he's a good fighter, obviously, but the out-ring rhetoric is just past, anything appealing to me. I just don't find him entertaining at all. So I would love to see, that happen. But each in its own time. Moraes, I think, is the right opponent because we get to find out about Aldo early. We'll get to know right away. And, if he loses, then, I think, he's going to be in real trouble with how you bounce back.
I agree. The one thing I do disagree with you, though, a little bit is that Jose Aldo's career has necessarily come off the rails because when you really put things in perspective, it was 2015 when he lost to Conor McGregor. Before that, he was a long reigning champion for like 6-7 years. He gets knocked out in a quick 15 seconds. I mean, it's notorious. He gets, no pun intended, gets knocked out. He loses those two hard losses against Max Holloway. Both fights he looked good, but Max Holloway Max Holloway at this point, you can make an argument that he's the greatest featherweight in history, even at 26, 27. Because he's beat the only other guy that would even, qualified for that title in Jose Aldo. He beat him and finished him twice. And Aldo was still like pretty much in his prime. He was only 31 years old. But those were hard losses, but you're dealing with a guy who has a specific striking style that likes heavy-handed strikers to come for him, to headhunt. He wears you down, and Max Holloway's just an exceptional talent, and he's also a guy who's huge at 145 pounds. And then he just lost to Volkanovski, who's the number one contender in the division, who a lot of people think might beat Max. And that was a decision fight that was very lackluster. It wasn't like a super dominant performance by Volkanovski, but Aldo definitely didn't get off. So he's lost 4 fights in about 10 to 11 years against 3 men. So he's still pretty much legit. I would even rank him probably still top 20, 25 pound for pound. Him going down to bantamweight, man, the first person I thought of when I seen this was, man, this has got to be like the worst news for Frankie Edgar, because he was going to go down there and reinvent his career at bantamweight. Now he's got the guy that beat him twice at featherweight going down there to that division. The second thing that, I obviously thought of is that when I saw this matchup, Marlon Moraes trains with Frankie Edgar. I think that's interesting that's going to be his first opponent because Frankie Edgar and Jose have history. Jose got through him twice, and now Marlon's going to take him on. This is going to be a 3-round fight, which that to me is interesting because Marlon is exceptional early. Jose's definitely got much more 5-round experience, and we saw Marlon fade against Cejudo. I don't know what we're going to see. I think we're going to see a blitzing fight here. I don't know what it's going to be with Jose Aldo going down to 135 pounds. I definitely think that's interesting. If he wins, if he gets a finish over Marlon Moraes, I think we see him fight Cejudo, and I think that is a fight that benefits Aldo if he can make that weight class because nobody takes Jose Aldo down. And Jose Aldo is he's taller, he's faster, far more crisper striker. I think you might get your wish and see Cejudo really take some punishment if Aldo still got a lot in him and can make this weight safely. But let's talk about this other one though before we sign off. This one I don't like as much. Faber and Petr Yan. It's been no secret. I mean, there's some names since I've been doing this podcast with you, Miguel, that I've bragged about, that I've seen prospects that I see as potential title people, and one of them's already got there. I was bragging highly on Israel Adesanya. I've been bragging highly on Macy Barber. I've been Gregor Gillespie, not to the extent, but I still think that he's a very top-notch unknown talent. The other one that I pinpointed the very first time I saw him before he even had a number next to his name was this guy, Petr Yan. He's now ranked number 4 in this division. To me, with him, Aljamain Sterling, Corey Sandhagen, that's the real scary lineup that Cejudo potentially has in front of him. When you add in Marlon Moraes, Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo, this is an amazing division. I'm not saying this is a bad matchup. I don't think this is like going backwards or nothing for Petr Yan because this is a great way to get his name into the casual audience perspective. But it's important to remember Jimmy Rivera beat Urijah Faber at bantamweight. Jimmy Rivera just lost all 3 rounds against Petr Yan. Petr Yan had a very standout performance against Jimmy Rivera. I think dropped him 3 times in that fight. This is definitely a fight I expect Petr Yan to be a heavy favorite in. But if Urijah Faber is going to come back, why step gradually up the rankings at 41 years old? You might as well jump in and see what you got. But that's what's going to happen here because the only thing I don't like about this is Sandhagen maybe would have just outclassed and out-finessed Faber. Petr Yan could hurt Faber. There's a difference that I don't really like with the matchmaking with this. But what's your thoughts on this?
We talked about it when Faber announced he was coming back, that, why? And I think that's the overriding question here. What's the point here? Faber is probably going to be an underdog in this fight. So what was the point of his comeback if it was to win one and lose one,
Exactly.
Is it to bank a couple of paydays? He's still in shape, and he's still in attraction and stuff like that in terms of box office. So you put him in your comeback, but what is the goal here, To me, this match tells me they're telling Urijah, you got 1 or 2 left, and we're going to make Petr Yan's name off of you. That's really the only way you can look at this fight. And, Faber is what Faber is, Maybe the best fighter to not have a belt, maybe a Hall of Famer who never had a belt, he's on the cusp of that type of conversation. So it's not, you can't put him in against, guys that there's no value to it, right? Now, if he beats Petr Yan, as you pointed out, Yan's going to be a favorite. Jan's been the guy who's been devastating, to other fighters and stuff like that. So if he can beat Petr Yan, then he has proved, that he's beyond where me and you are giving him credit for. So that's why I take that fight if I'm Faber. If I'm Yan, it's all about Faber's a big name, and I'm going to be favored. Yeah, hell yeah, I'll take that fight, Once you accept Faber's comeback, and with the talent in that weight class that you've been pointing out and stuff like that, you really are in a situation where you can only do so many things with Faber, where before you run into this, before you run into a new blood kind of guy fighting a 41-year-old who was last generation star, and it should be a handing off of the torch. And I'm all right with that. What I don't want to see, if Faber breaks through, we get to see 2 or 3 more fights of this type of stuff with Urijah. And again, I'm not a fan of the geriatric club. He's not what he was at 30 years old. At 41, I don't care what steroids he's on or not on. And I'm not accusing him or what conditioning he's been doing or whatever. He can't be better now than he was at 30. So what do we get? We get a guy who's there to give his name up to the next generation guy. Jan's the first guy who's got a shot at it. Jan should grab it. And
do you like that?
Get hurt, but Jan should have no mercy.
Do you like? Well, that's his nickname too, and that's what's funny. But do you like that model? The UFC clearly enjoys this. Okay, we got these new stars. As I like how you put it, hand your name off to Petr Yan. Do you like that model of all right, you were that old generation. You were that.
You can't go to Urijah and tell him, you're lying at some point. I'm not a fan of lying here, I don't know if you can go to Urijah and be like, look, we're going to put you in a fight against a top 5 guy. You're probably going to be the underdog. We expect you to lose. And, hopefully, if you don't, we'll see what happens. But we're going to take your name and your reputation and kind of hand it off to Petr Yan, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not telling Faber that, right? Or Faber, if Faber reads the writing on the wall and knows that that's what's happening.
How can he not?
Yeah. So, but there's something about it, that lack of community. There's something, like you said, there's something not kosher about this fight. There's something that's not natural about it. And it has to do with all of that type of stuff, How can Urijah Faber walk in this fight and think, I can win this, or I can win the season? I think he should be thinking, man, this is a tough fight, So I don't.
This was the exact fight I was saying that when he was coming back. I'm like, man, what is he? Is he going to go in there and fight Petr Yan? I remember saying that. Like, what's going to come of this? And here it is. Like, he's really going to do it.
Yeah, and we're the UFC, so we've seen this type of thing before. Does he become like a Donald Cerrone type, where Cerrone? Now we're going to have Faber here for 5 more fights. Then yeah, you can book him for a bunch of these. He might beat Petr Yan and then lose to Zabit or whoever the next guy is of that, because you keep running him in there. And Cerrone, beat a couple of guys and then got taken out. And you get to find out, who the real contenders are. The problem is at bantamweight, the talent level is so high right now that I think you need a better operator than Faber to really iron out the top 5. Faber becomes a top 15 doorman. He's not a top 5 doorman here.
See, I love the additions of Edgar and Aldo if they can make those weight classes safely, because keep in mind, Frankie Edgar, he's been he just went 5 rounds. He lost probably at least 4 of those rounds, if not 5, but he went 5 rounds with Max Holloway at 145 pounds in a title fight. He smashed Yair Rodriguez a few years ago. He's still an elite guy. Jose Aldo just dropped Jeremy Stevens and knocked out Renato Moicano. It's taking the elite of the elite to beat those two. If they can drop a weight class, former champions, and go in here with the Henry Cejudos and the Corey Sandhagens and the Aljamain Sterlings and the Marlon Moraes and the Petr Yans, this new fresh crop of awesome bantamweights that have really filled the vacuum since TJ Dillashaw fell out. This division has become one of the hottest, most interesting divisions in the sport because they're all young. Very few of them have fought each other, and here they are coming up. If they can go down in there, they make it really interesting because I still think that they still have a lot in them. And if they can go in there and Frankie Edgar gets matched up with Sandhagen and Aldo gets matched up with Moraes, or they mix it up and they throw Edgar in there with Petr Yan or something, that's interesting. Urijah Faber, man, I don't feel like as you just said, I don't feel like he's a good indicator. I feel like this is a fight that Petr Yan should win and should look very impressive with.
I'm okay. with Aldo, if Aldo and Edgar are both heading down to that weight class and we keep fighting Faber around, those are okay potential matchups for later on. Once you've answered the questions of Edgar and Aldo. Like if Aldo loses to Moraes and he's got another fight on his contract, stick him in for another fight with Faber. It doesn't matter all that much. If Edgar, goes down to 135 and whatever happens with Faber, that turns out to be his first fight at 135. I'm all right with that. It's like a foot warming or your feet wet kind of thing. Faber is after all, a big name. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect in this fight. Yeah, just it seems like the idea too is that they loved Faber, right? Faber was their poster boy the whole time. So why do this to him?
Well, this is a side road, but I think it needs to be mentioned. Without a doubt, Henry Cejudo needs to go ahead and give up that flyweight belt, because go ahead and let Benavidez and Figueiredo or one of them fight it out and take it on and just go on with that division or scrap it all together, whatever they're wanting to do. Give those fighters some leeway, because one thing is for sure, and you'll agree with me, and I think it's part of the reason why Cejudo is going to be very calculated about when and who he fights while he's champion, because that man has murderer's row waiting for him when he comes back to bantamweight. And, him going up there and beating Moraes, that was very impressive. Very impressive. That was when I became a real believer of Henry Cejudo. And it's hard. It just seems the sport moves by so fast, Miguel. It's hard to believe it. Starting out this year, we were seeing Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw, because that just seems so long ago now. Because TJ Dillashaw, I don't care if he comes back in 2021 or not and does decide to fight. This division's so different. And this division has, when you look at how good Corey Sandhagen is, when you look at how good Petr is, Marlon Moraes, I thought was going to beat Cejudo. When you look at how good Aljamain Sterling's been looking, and then you add in, you can throw Faber in that category. When you throw old vets like Faber, Aldo, and Edgar in the mix also, yeah, you got a division right now, and Cejudo's he's got 3 potential top-notch contenders to fight next year when he comes back healthy. And to think if he gets through this murderer's row in a few years and he's still around, yeah, he's gonna be he's gonna be able to be as cringy as he wants, because he'll be in the GOAT category, because he's got some serious competitors coming up, and I'm interested to see how they play out. And one good thing about these new talents coming in, these older vets like Aldo and Edgar coming in is, they might fight Cejudo, and it gives some of these younger guys time to even develop even more. This is just a really interesting weight class right now. And I just hope Cejudo doesn't, just be ridiculous and drag things out, because there's a lot of great potential fights for him. And I'm interested to see where it goes.
Yep, I think, definitely the bantamweight division is one that's very, very high on the radar right now. And it may be the most, like you said, the most talented division. The bottom line is it may be the most advanced international talent, where the international talent is actually holding up. And, it's not just like, Brazilians and Americans and the advanced nations of MMA. It's like these people are coming from all over the world. And, that's what's kind of made Faber become, a B-class guy kind of in the weight class, unless he's got something new to prove. So definitely good times for the bantamweight division, and good times for the welterweight division this weekend.
Absolutely. This has been CRP News Roundup. We recapped UFC Boston. We previewed UFC Singapore, Bellator 232 this weekend, headlined by Rory MacDonald and Douglas Lima's rematch for the welterweight title of Bellator. And we covered the big headlines that are coming up with Jose Aldo and Urijah Faber taking on 2 of the top talents in the bantamweight division at UFC 245. This has been Devin Miller. That is Miguel Iterati. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the share button, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.